apologise and thank you all for staying with us. So if we move on, Julie, to slide 2. So today, presenting the team coaching evaluation study will be Dr. Julie Haddock-Miller, Dr. Neil Kay, Holly Bennett from the Mentoring and Coaching Hub, and myself, also from the Hub. Let's move on to the agenda for today. I'll do this a bit quicker since we lost some time. So we'll have the short introduction, and then research objectives, team coaching background, team coaching program objectives, the methodology, extended literature review, participant engagement, and then the impact for coachee and teams, challenges and questions, research and evaluation toolkit, and future of team coaching. And then, as Julie mentioned, we'll also have a Q&A at the end. So back in 2017, the Mentoring and Coaching Hub engaged Julie and Neil in this impact study. And here we really wanted to look at how team coaching supports the personal and professional development of team coaching participants and contributes more broadly to the strategic priorities of the Mentoring and Coaching Hub. And it's very much hoped that the study will help shape the future of the coaching offer and in secure engagement across the movement, positioning the Mentoring and Coaching Hub at the centre of excellence and best practice for team coaching, including ongoing monitoring and evaluation. So to give a bit of a background for team coaching in MSF, so team coaching has been present in the various sections for some time, but it's been on a more ad hoc basis. The Mentoring and Coaching Hub started to centralize and manage the use of team coaching in 2017. So as the Hub, we've supported the completion of 10 team coaching interventions, 3 of them in the field and 7 in headquarters or partner sections. Today, the Hub has 3 ongoing team coaching interventions, all of which are in the field. There are 11 new requests that we're working on. And what's kind of quite interesting to see, 8 of them in the field and 3 in headquarters. So a bit of a change from the beginning. Most of the team coaching interventions have been led by external coaches in collaboration with our internal coaches. And all of them have participated in our in-house coaching education. As of 2019, we had sufficient internal capacity to start delivering 100% in-house team coachings. And in this way, we've really managed to build up our capacity and now can lead team coaching interventions internally. Next slide.
Okay, so thanks very much, John, for that introduction. As John's mentioned, I'm Julie Haddock-Miller, and many of you on the call actually today I know through a variety of projects. And you'll see that a lot of these slides look very familiar because we've previously presented the results of the mentoring impact evaluation, and we're currently involved in the one-to-one coaching evaluation, but this today is going to focus very much on team coaching. So we were commissioned, Neil and I, some time ago now, so 2017, the same time as the mentoring project, to really specifically look at team coaching as an intervention and the impact of team coaching. But if we go one step back before we look at the research objectives, and we look at MSF in terms of the main objective of team coaching and then what sits underneath that, the main objectives for team coaching were really to create a new, productive, constructive and sustainable working agreement and to help with efficiency and ultimately the results to support and empower people in the field. So you see a lot of the language that's used is very similar to the language in one-to-one coaching and mentoring as well in terms of supporting people in the field. There are these three specific objectives, one which is around the value and the practicalities of collaborative leadership within MSF as a movement, as an organisation, simplifying, clarifying roles, decision-making processes, again, within the field, within MSF, and then becoming skillful at a coach approach to management. So utilising a coaching approach within the management and leadership style within MSF. So these are some of the broader objectives of team coaching, which no doubt over time morph and develop. Now, thinking about the research objectives for this particular project and moving on, there were three key research objectives, albeit what sat underneath these three objectives was probably a page of sub-objectives. And the first was to help the MSF Mentoring Coaching Hub and other members within MSF to understand the wider team, the wider landscape of team coaching. So what's actually happening outside of MSF in the world of team coaching that can help inform MSF's approach to team coaching. The second research objective was to understand what coachees within MSF expect to gain from coaching and to see if these benefits are realised. And then the third is to really identify what could be learned from coaching, what might inform the future team coaching strategy, and of course the mentoring and one-to-one coaching strategy, because very much these interventions, they're not in isolation to one another. What we've found actually in the research is those that participate in team coaching are sometimes receiving one-to-one coaching and also receiving mentoring. But you can see there the three broader objectives. Now, I'm just going to pause for it because I can see that we've got some more people that have joined the waiting room for the call. So I'm going to just let those people into the room to join the webinar. So just bear with me for a moment. Okay, and I'm back with you. So as I mentioned, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat box and I'll try and look at those as we work through the webinar and make sure that although we've later than planned, I'll try and make sure I leave some time at the end for the questions, because that's sometimes always the most interesting part, is hearing the questions that you might have. So do pop them in the chat box. And just whilst we're going through this initial part of the presentation, if you want to just remain on mute, just to avoid any background noise, that would be great. I've also mentioned that we're recording the webinar on Zoom, so we'll be able to send out a link later on via Holly, so you can listen back to it again. Now, what I'd like to describe is just a little bit of the methodology for this particular research project, which took place over 2 years. And my colleague, Dr. Neil Kay, is going to talk us through the methodological approach to this project. Okay, so Neil, if you could just unmute if you may.
Thanks, Julie, and hello, everybody. Yes, so just methodologically, to say that the research team adopted a pragmatic approach, and we were very much guided by the MSF MCHub as to who was approached to engage in the research. And similar to previous evaluation projects that Julie has alluded to, we adopted a mixed methods longitudinal approach. And the idea was to use a range of methodologies to encompass, to include the views of coaches, the facilitators of the team coaching interventions, the coachees themselves, and other key stakeholders. So in terms of the timeline, the idea was to firstly undertake an online survey to understand the views of the facilitators and the coachees undertaking the interventions. Following this, we sought to kind of do some in-depth interviews and engage with coachees and other key stakeholders in this, using this methodology, followed by a kind of repeat online survey following the completion of the intervention to find out more of a kind of evaluation from the participants and the facilitators in terms of the team coaching interventions. The aim from the beginning was to engage with, I think it was at least 3 or 4 different teams, and Julie will speak to some of the challenges that meant that in the end we weren't as successful as we hoped to be in terms of engaging, both in terms of the number of teams and the number of participants within each of the teams. And that will be part of our discussion later on. Julie just wants to go on to the next slide. We can talk about how many participants we were successful in engaging. So in terms of the first team, we sought to kind of engage all 10 participants on the coaching intervention, and we managed to get 7 out of 10 to take part in the first online survey. And we had 5 interviews with 4 participants as well to talk about their experience of the intervention, followed by 5 of the original 7 who took part in the first survey, also completing the second online survey. In terms of the facilitators, the intervention was led by 2 facilitators, and we had 100% completion in all of the different stages of the research with them. In terms of team 2, our research was curtailed somewhat in terms of the timeline, and in terms of the actual engagement, we were also limited to the number of people who engaged with the online survey and the interviews, as you can see here. And in fact, it was curtailed, so we weren't able to do a second online follow-up survey. And nevertheless, the facilitators in team 2 were completed the survey and interviews as and when we required for them. I'm going to hand back to Julie to talk a bit more about the findings of the research.
Lovely, thank you very much, Neil. So before we go on to findings, one of the things we'd like to look at is just brief you on the literature review. So with any research of this kind, we would always complete a fairly extensive literature review to understand the current landscape of the topic. And because we didn't engage with as many teams as we would have liked, we really did what was called an extended literature review. So we spent more time in it than we would usually do. So the process for this, fairly straightforward in terms of it being systematic, is we listed a number of search themes. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, we've got those, what were in 13 different search terms. So what essentially we do is we look at Google Scholar and Summons and different journals with those different search terms. And then we review the first 100 abstracts of the literature. And then we decide whether it's relevant or not to this particular intervention. When we've reviewed the first 100 abstracts and we've made a decision as to whether it's relevant or not, we'll put the abstracts into a Dropbox and download the pieces of research that are open source. So open source means that any member of the general public can access them. So we looked at 1,378 pieces of literature in total. And in the end, we uploaded 436 open source pieces of literature. So these open source pieces of literature are currently sitting in a Dropbox, and they're filed in those thematic files. And the MSF Mentoring Coaching Hub have access to those 436 documents. What we also did was we categorized the open source pieces of literature. So there were 322 books on those topic areas at the bottom of the slide. There were 715 articles, so empirical studies, theoretical studies. There were 34 reports, so professional body reports, for example, industry reports, and there were 307 other categories. A lot of the 307 were actually doctorate thesis, so research that had been undertaken at doctorate level, or master's thesis as well. So quite a lot of doctoral master's research that had been stored into open source documents. So Mentoring Coaching Hub do have access to, the team do have access to all of those pieces of literature that are open source. So if anybody wanted to look at any of those particular categories, whether it's return on investment, online team coaching, there's certainly plenty there to keep you going. What I would say is we didn't find very much on COVID-19 online team coaching or COVID-19 virtual team coaching, so that combination of search terms. And I think because obviously at that point in time, it was still fairly new. What there is in COVID-19 is there's quite a lot about peer support, and particularly in the healthcare sector and COVID-19. But there isn't a great deal specifically on team coaching, so that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, so moving on. So the bit that you're probably most interested in is what did we find when we looked at the survey data and the interview data about the overall impact of team coaching. So what Neil and I have done is we thematized it to look at the most significant themes. I think that the theme that came out most from the data was the theme of voice. So that team coaching really enables people to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized. And for those working in a team, it's particularly important to feel that they can be seen, heard, and recognized. The second is within a team is to be acknowledged. So team coaching gives individuals the ability to be acknowledged within their team, to have a place within the team. I think one of the key facilitators of that is that team coaching removes hierarchy, or at least it aims to remove hierarchy within the team. And what we mean by that is that within teams, there are hierarchical positions. So someone that is a team leader, a team manager, and those that report to the manager and the team leader. Now, in a team coaching intervention, everybody has an equal voice. So this idea that everybody has an equal voice means that everybody can be acknowledged within the team. And then there's the giving and receiving feedback. So team coaching enables the giving and receiving of feedback, which means, again, that those participants are enabled to have a voice, because often in usual environments, they often don't feel that they're able to have a voice. The second area is performance. So, with many of these interventions, what sits underneath them is that an impact might be around competency development. So, within the MSF competency framework, whether that's their leadership competence, team working, vision, strategy. And there certainly was some evidence of increased performance, or at least that's what was reported, around competency development and leadership and team working. And then the third significant theme was around learning. So the idea that team coaching provided the opportunity to learn from each other, learn together as a group, and to really evidence reciprocal learning. So what we mean by reciprocal learning is that there was very much co-learning. So people learned together. So it was very much backward and forward, and each of the team members were able to learn together, to challenge one another in a very positive way, to stretch one another. And the facilitator style in terms of the questions that they were able to ask was they were very much able to challenge and stretch the team. And by challenging and stretching the team meant that there was reciprocal learning. So they were the overall impacts of team coaching, the key impacts of team coaching. And then we're going to look at those in a bit more detail. This presentation is accompanied by a short report, and the short report has a bit more detail on these areas. So it may be that we don't have a great deal of time today, but certainly you can have a copy of these slides, and I'm sure that Holly will be able to send a copy of the short report as well that accompanies this presentation, but you've got more detail. Now, I've picked these because these are some examples of the quotes from coachees in the various interventions. And I think the first one really demonstrates voice. And this is where the coachee explained that team coaching can provide a unique experience where people can share, relax, listen, and full of respect. In missions, there is a hierarchy, but in team coaching, everyone is equal. Everyone can say what they need to say. Giving people space to express themselves, it is amazing. So that was really, that along with a number of other quotations, really for me, picks up on this idea of voice. That everybody has a place within a team coaching interventions, that everyone is able to participate. And the second quotation here, and I think this visual, by the way, really demonstrates the second quotation. The 2018 intervention was much more powerful than 2017. 100%, I was lost at the first intervention and what I was doing there. The second intervention in 2018, it was much clearer. It was explained in a different way, in a way I can understand. I have a lot of change in the team. We used to meet all the time for professional meetings. After the team intervention, we changed our approach and dynamic. We were more familiar with each other. So I think here there's something around connectivity, and that's why the visual is there actually in terms of connectivity. But sometimes we need to do something more than once in order to really understand what it is we're doing. And I think that also applies to team coaching, is that it can be explained in one way and we can experience in one way. But then the second time it can be explained in a different way and we experience it differently as well. And it can have a different impact. So hence this idea of it being much clearer. So I think that's a, oh, I think we've just got one of our colleagues that's muted for a moment with some background noise. Just mute you, so bear with me. I don't think I can actually, but hopefully there won't be any more background noise. In a sense, this idea that, you know, the dynamic change, so the approach change, the dynamic change, we were more familiar with each other. So this idea that team coaching brings people together and creates this familiarity with one another, which means that it can change the dynamic in the team, which obviously can be very helpful in terms of this idea of reciprocal learning and the working relationship that the team has. So a couple of really great quotes there, I think. I wanted to illustrate again with this next visual. So this is one of the survey statistics of the difference between, we can see here, the dark blue being the first survey and the light blue being the second. And we asked the question in terms of the focus. What was the focus of the team coaching intervention? And to what extent did team coaching address that particular focus, either a lot or a great deal, or not at all actually? But here we've just provided you with the statistics of a lot or a great deal, and we've combined them. So we can see the difference there in team coaching helping to create a shared vision. There was a significant difference between the first intervention at 50% and then the second intervention at 80%. This idea of developing collaborative leadership. So, you know, the 33% in the first survey and then the 80% in the second. And then this idea of coordinating shared needs and requests. So really supporting one another. And again, we see this significant increase between the first and the second intervention here, the online survey. So some really quite powerful statistics, even though the sample size is relatively small. I think we can glean a lot from that. And then the second, in terms of following the intervention, we asked in relation to competency development, if we think about the two interventions, what it is that you're able to, you feel more comfortable with. And it's interesting here, because despite the fact that there was a slight drop from the first survey to the second in the survey statistics, the interview data gave us a different message. So there's something there about the relationship between statistical data and qualitative data. But certainly we saw an increase in relation to the coachees feeling that they were able to challenge and stretch the team, and then ensuring their voice was heard. That went from 50% to 80% between the first intervention and the second intervention, which is quite a significant jump. But again, you know, it's really important when we're doing this kind of evaluation work is to take into account not just the survey data, but the interview data as well. And what is the interview data telling us? And here we can see two more quotes. So in relation to competency development, the first one, the coachee said, "I've learned how to have a more strategic role and how to support and motivate others. And now I think I am a leader from behind. I empower my team and I'm now aware of my approach and style." And there's something around, I mean, some of you will have read the Nelson Mandela book where he talks about you can only lead from behind, and how, you know, putting your team forward when celebrating success, but actually protecting them from dangers and taking on some of that responsibility as the leader. How do you fundamentally motivate and support others so that they have success? Whether that success is different for different people. So whether that is a transition into a different role, being successful in their current role, finding meaning in the work that we have, finding meaning in working with others and supporting others. And I know something, you know, having worked with MSF for several years now, I know that, you know, for many of you, if not all of you, you know, this having meaning is important. And you know, for many of you, that's why you work within the movement, within MSF, because it's that sense of meaning and belonging. And then there's another quote here where a coachee explains that at one point I was ready to leave. Now I'm ready to stay longer if I do leave the team or MSF, it depends on which comes first. I think I will give the team a chance. It made me feel less stressed in my position. I'm not sure that I'm going to stay, but at least I'll stay for longer. And I think, we could look at that. Is that a really positive outcome? Well, the fact that this coachee feels that they feel less stressed. So that's the starting point there, I think, with that quote. And that's an important aspect of whether it's team coaching, or mentoring, the reduction in stress. And often the reduction in stress means that we feel more inclined to stay, or at least we'll give it some more time. So it might be that this particular coachee, and this was some time ago now, so that coachee will stay for longer, but potentially that might be a year, it might be 2, it might be much longer. But the fact that they were ready to leave prior to the team coaching intervention, but now at least they're ready to stay, which I think is a great outcome of the team coaching intervention. Now, just moving on, we've got another slide here, and we're nearly there with slides. I will move on fairly rapidly through these last few to leave time for questions. So this was, a question that is a very popular question in any research is, what is the overall satisfaction with the intervention? So we always ask that. So whether it's mentoring, one-to-one coaching or team coaching, we always ask about overall satisfaction, because it is a good indication of whether or not we should continue to invest in the intervention. So we can see here, what we're really looking for is the light blue and the medium blue. So we can see in the first intervention that here, around about 60% plus were somewhat satisfied or very, but there were some, 33% that were dissatisfied or neither. Whereas we see in the second survey, so after the second intervention, that actually all of the participants were either very satisfied or somewhat. So that's a big transition from the first to the second there. And then one final one around statistics is the evaluation of facilitators. So one of the aspects we were asked to do was to evaluate the facilitators in terms of their effectiveness in relation to listening, questioning, giving clear feedback, establishing rapport, and then providing support. So we can see here across the board, whether it was the first online survey or the second, is overall the results were very positive. So, really great outcome there for the facilitators. And then here, I think this is the last slide that I'm going to look at, and then I'm going to hand back to, 2 more slides actually, then I'm going to hand back to John. So in terms of challenges, there were a number of challenges that we experienced, and all of you will be very familiar with these challenges within MSF. I think the first, when conducting research of this nature, what we experienced is that the field is a very volatile place. There's risk of natural disasters, conflict, humanitarian catastrophes. In the latter part of the intervention and this particular evaluation, we were due to evaluate at least 1 more team, if not 2, and COVID-19 happened. So we were not able to evaluate the last final team, or at least 2 teams, simply because of COVID-19. So, it's unpredictable, it's always challenging, it's unpredictable for both the team and the mission as well. So I think the environment is a big challenge for any longitudinal research, but particularly of this nature. I think the second is the commitment to the team of the buy-in to the longitudinal evaluation. So there might be an initial agreement of, yes, we'll do this, but teams can get quite fatigued by research. So research that takes place over several months or years, when people become fatigued and tired, they no longer engage with it. So that's something to bear in mind. In terms of, can we generalise the results of this? Because each of the team interventions is a bespoke intervention, it's unique for that team. It's difficult to generalise with these impacts, but certainly what we can do is we can look for themes across different teams to see whether there are similarities and differences. And of course, one of the other challenges is, do you gather statistical data, which has its limitations, or do you gather qualitative data, which takes time and time and money to do, resources, or do you do both? And then you've got the time and the money involved with that to think about. And then the practicalities in terms of the team coaching strategy, something to think about is, to what extent is evaluation embedded in the team coaching strategy. Obviously, if we can embed evaluation into learning and development interventions, it's much easier to do this. I think there's something around dissemination, sharing data, evidence of impact and lessons learned. I know within MSF, people are always very keen to hear about research and impact, both positive and negative, and the lessons learned. So what can we do in terms of disseminating more broadly, engaging more people in the research outcomes? And then aligning team coaching, one-to-one coaching and mentoring. So that's something as well that perhaps is a challenge. So we raised some questions here. We can't necessarily answer these questions today, but it's something for all of us to take away and to think about that are engaged in team coaching or other learning and development interventions. So the first is, to what extent is team coaching research generalizable when it is context and team specific? So that's one of the questions that we leave there for consideration. Second, to what extent is longitudinal research possible in a volatile and complex humanitarian environment? Third, how can MSF and the Mentoring Coaching Hub disseminate the learning from team coaching most effectively? And today, we might have had challenges in the first 15 minutes, but hopefully we've got there eventually with this webinar. And the fourth, to what degree can team coaching be aligned to one-to-one coaching and mentoring? Should it be aligned? Can it be aligned? How should it be aligned? So these are all questions that we raise as a consequence of the research that we've undertaken. Now, I promise the last slide from me, and then I'm going to hand over to John. He's got one slide on the future of team coaching, which I'm sure you'll all be interested in. And then we've got Q&A. So the last slide, the other thing that Neil and I did, so alongside the extended literature review, we also created a team coaching research and evaluation toolkit. And that was really designed to help the Mentoring Coaching Hub and others engaged in team coaching going forward to evaluate these interventions. So that is a resource that is there, it is available. And it may be that some of you are involved in evaluation of other learning and development interventions, and you might want to have a look at that, of which Holly will be able to give you access to the research and evaluation toolkit. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of impacts, as I'm keen that we allow some questions. So I'm going to hand over to John, and he's just going to talk through one slide on the future of team coaching, and then the team will do our best to answer any questions that you've got. Okay, so hopefully John can unmute himself, and then I will hand over just for a couple of minutes before I have a look at the chat box for the questions you may have. John, are you able to join?
Thank you, Julie. So yeah, just a quick one slide, and just to give you a couple of pointers and ideas of where we might be going now. The one theme that is, it's been with us since 2017, and that's really building up the capacity. That's both building up our internal capacity, which we have done with our coaching education and the 2 cohorts, but also building up our capacity in terms of the network we have and our external coaches. And that's also been a clear focus and something that we see as essential to develop the offer. So another key aspect of our internal pool of coaches is really supporting them, and that is with supervision. Here we heavily rely on external partners, and this is also something that is up and coming now, essential. One thing that has, of course, become even more clear now with COVID, but that we really have to have a diverse approach. This is also what Julie shows very much, Neil, with the study, that we have to have a more diverse approach. One of the things will definitely be going for virtual offers. This should be piloted quite shortly now, this year. And also in terms of methodology. So we really can even more so have a tailor-made team coaching, and in that way meet the needs that are in the field and also at headquarter level. So that was just quickly a couple of things from the future from my side. Last, I'd just like to, before we go into Q&A, really thank Julie and Neil for being on us on the journey from 2017, and really helping us and giving us a lot of what we need now as a foundation. So thank you, and let's move to the Q&A.
Great, thank you very much, Sean. Right, I'm going to have a look at the chat box and to see what's come up. There was an immediate question, John, just as you were presenting regards to utilising external questions. So we had one question: why did you work with external coaches, John?
So when we started off in 2017, we didn't have the capacity internally in MSF to deliver team coaching at the quality standard that we needed in order to support the teams. So in that way, we started a collaboration where in nearly all team coaching interventions, we've had a lead external coach matched together with one of our internal coaches. In this way, we built up internal capacity, and already last year we could launch the first 100% internal team coaching. So it's a bit of a longer journey, but we had to take that path in order to get the quality we wanted.
Lovely, thank you, John. And then Neil, there's a question here. I'm just going to go back to the slide around challenges. So Neil, what were the constraints identified? Were the constraints identified linked to the methodology chosen? So I just go back to this slide, and then Neil, if you wanted to comment on that, if you may, if you're able to unmute. So were the constraints identified linked to the methodology chosen?
Maybe you can help me out a bit with this, Julie, because
yeah, sure.
I'm not sure I understand the question properly.
Yeah, so can't see who wrote the question, but if you wanted to sort of sort of expand on it, that would be great. I think if I can just add there, so we have, looks like we've got a comment. Yeah. What do you, this might be for John, but I'll come back to this one, John. So yeah, just going back to the question on methodology, if I can have a look at that. So were the constraints identified linked to the methodology chosen? So I think that when you refer to constraints, I think you might be referring to challenges, so hence this slide here, and were they linked to methodology? So some of them absolutely were, because what we chose was we chose a mixed methodology of both a survey and interviews, which ideally we wanted to have over a longitudinal perspective. So following the first intervention, the second intervention. Now, you could argue that it worked to an extent, because we did have some of the team that engaged in both the survey and the interviews for the first intervention and then the second intervention. So, to some extent, the mixed methodology worked. I think our biggest challenge was actually getting all the teams to engage in the research in the first place. So, for example, Neil and I had developed all of the tools, so the survey and the interview questions, and we were about to test them with a team, and the team pulled out at the last minute due to constraints in their environment. Another example of environmental constraints is that we were due to work with 2 teams, and again, the teams sort of pulled out for various environmental challenges. So if we had have engaged with those teams that I'm not going to refer to names, so those teams that I just mentioned, we were not able to collect data, then I might suggest that it's because of the methodology. But the biggest challenge actually was engaging with the teams to start with. So we had a situation where a team would say they would engage, or they were thinking about engaging with the research, and then it didn't happen. So that was the biggest challenge, was actually getting them to engage in the first place. And this is where, when we talk here towards the bottom of the slide around the evaluation strategy and some of the practicalities, is if evaluation is going to be a central part of any learning and development intervention, I think having evaluation embedded into the strategy of the intervention is really critical in that being a success. Because if a team is presented with, this is the approach to team coaching, this is what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and alongside that, we're going to be evaluating at each of these pivotal points So whether it's after the first intervention or the second or the third, and then a final evaluation several weeks or several months later, and that's positioned and presented, then I think that potentially there could be greater buy-in if it's presented as part of the package of team coaching. I think when we go to teams after they've experienced it or midway through, then it becomes more of a challenge to engage them at the midpoint or when it's completed. So I think that's something to bear in mind for future interventions and for the evaluation strategy more broadly. So hopefully that answers your question. Right, let me just get back to more. So we had another one I think that's potentially for John. So John, so what do you see as the risks for the future in the possibility to do team coaching on a broader scale? So I think there's two questions in there, John. So one is the possibility of team coaching on a broader scale within MSF, and the second is what are the risks for the future for team coaching?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, definitely, one of the risks for the future would be if we don't manage to be able to adapt the offer to meet the needs of the organization. For example, here, we have to, as I mentioned earlier, we have to diversify the offer we have, the methodology. We have to be able to offer online team coaching, but we also have to have a more diverse pool of coaches. We're very clear on that. We focused on that on cohort 2 of our education, and so we have a lot of work to do, and I think we're going to have to. It will be something we will have to continue with. To offer team coaching on a wider scale is something we've already started. So, for example, now we're working with a cell, with a coordination team, and with project teams. So it's a process where all the 3 levels, 4 teams are working together, and that's definitely a large scale team coaching and doing it all virtually as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. There's another question, which I think again is for you. I lost the Q&A, but I'm not sure that I know the abbreviations here. So the question is, are these sessions done for both NS, which I presume is national staff, and IS? If yes, what is the percentage of participation between NS and IS? So I presume that is national staff and international staff, I assume, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
I don't have the data in front of me here, but we definitely aim that most of the coaching resources are used in the field. Having said that, in the beginning, we did see a need to also establish team coaching at a headquarter level in order for the offer to be understood and offered to the field. And that we've already seen a change where in the beginning we had, the data I was showing earlier on, we had more coaching interventions in headquarters, whereas now we have a lot more requests coming from the field. So this we really hope will continue, but it's definitely an offer for all levels of the organization. But we do focus really as much as possible supporting our teams in the field, our national staff. Team coaching gives the team the tools they need to deal with a lot of high turnover, and often as not, it's the national staff who are left to deal with that, and we hope team coaching can support them there.
Lovely, thank you, John. Appreciate that. And there was a few comments actually. It's more than a question, so this is probably for the whole of the mentoring coaching hub and the team, which is around the resources. So I've had quite a lot of comments towards the beginning when I was just sharing the slide on the extended literature review, which was back here. So quite a few comments: can we access the resources? Can we utilise the resources? So that's something to liaise with probably Holly and the team. One thing I would say is there was, Neil and I produced a fairly lengthy report. In fact, I've got it here, a fairly lengthy report. I'm sure you wouldn't want to read this. I don't know if you can see my video camera. This is quite long. So this is the summary. This is the summary of the literature that's in the Dropbox. That's a written summary. So you might want to start with having a look at the written summary of the literature. And that, you know, it may be that Holly can provide access to the summary of the literature, and then you can decide to kind of pinpoint which articles do you want to then have a look at in more detail. So that might be a starting point. Have a look at the summary of the extended literature review. When I say summary, it's about 405 pages. It's quite extensive because it summarises each of the themes. I think there's at least 40 plus sources for each of the themes. So that might be a starting point, but certainly, you know, Holly and John and and Neil can have a chat perhaps straight after this webinar with regards to that. So quite a few comments on that. I think that might be it, and I'm conscious that we've come to 2 o'clock, so we're at 3 o'clock your time, Sarah. Well, depending where you are in the world, it could be any o'clock, couldn't it? But one thing I would want to say is, just from all of us, a huge thank you to those that took part in the research, coaches, colleagues that volunteered their time. You know, we couldn't do any of this work without those people that contribute to it. So, you know, I think it's really important to acknowledge them and to thank them for their input and their insights, which was really fantastic. So thank you very much for that. You have our email addresses on the slides, and I'm sure Holly, after the webinar, will circulate the slides to all of you. And we also have a short report accompanies the slides as well, which is here. So Holly's got that. I'm sure she can circulate that too. And I'm just so pleased to see, you know, it's so wonderful, over 70 of you on the webinar today, which is really fantastic. So just a big thank you for persevering in those first 15 minutes. I think this started on platform, we're going to move to Teams, ended up on Zoom. There we go. You know, certainly what we try and do is to be as flexible as possible. So well done to Holly and to John for getting through the technical difficulties. Yes, thank you, Jane. Thanks to Holly and John for getting through the technical difficulties and getting us through this on Zoom. Really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for giving your time today to come along. Really appreciate it. And do send, I'm sure if you have any other questions, if you were to send them to John, we'd be more than happy to answer those, John, wouldn't we?
Definitely. Thank you all.
Yeah, so thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to stop recording now, and then we'll get all the various bits and pieces out to you. So thank you so much. It'd be really great, actually, John, Holly, if you want to stay on for a couple of minutes, and we'll just pick up on any questions, etc. But thanks, everybody, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm just going to stop recording, everybody.